Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Ernest Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. Week 1 in the college basketball season has come and gone. There weren't too many crazy results. Emphasis on too many. There were a couple, and they definitely impacted the rankings. But other than that, most of the teams won their easy games and really just moved up a spot in the AP poll because a team ahead of them lost. But I'm going to go over the Week 2 AP Top 25 rankings and see what I think about what the AP voters did. And probably there will be more movement next week because you have the Gavitt games and the Champions Classic that should shake up the rankings. But let's get into the Week 2 AP Top 25 poll in college basketball. Kansas is still at number 1, and again, not a shot because of the fact they beat 2 easy opponents, so those were easy wins. But up next, they've got the Kentucky Wildcats. And if Kansas loses that game, they will lose their perch as the number 1 team in college basketball. But I think a lot of people think Kansas is better than Kentucky at this stage in the game because they have a lot of experienced players. So if the Jayhawks win that game, they'll definitely stay at number 1, and they deserve to be number 1 right now based on the way that they look and their roster as a whole. Purdue's at number 2. They won 2 easy games as well, and they do have Xavier this week in the Gavitt game. That's a game that Purdue cannot overlook, and if the Boilermakers lose, they will fall from their perch at number 2 in the AP poll. But Purdue moved up 1 spot because the Duke Blue Devils lost, but Purdue's looking really good early, and I do think that for now anyway, number 2 makes sense for the Boilers. Arizona's at number 3. They're one of the big risers in the AP Top 25 poll this week. In one of the only big games of the Week 1 slate college basketball, they won at the Duke Blue Devils. They won in Cameron Indoor Stadium, something that no other team has done yet in the John Shire era until Arizona just did it. Caleb Love didn't even have a massive game, but Umar Ballo and Pell Larson, all those guys played really well. Arizona's looking good early. Granted, it is just the first week of the season. Duke could get a lot better, and that's not to lessen the impact of Arizona's win. The Wildcats definitely look like the best team in the Pac-12 for now, but with it being so early in the season, it is hard to tell how good all these teams are, but Arizona deserves to move up to number 3 in college basketball for probably the most impressive win in college basketball as of now. Marquette's at number 4, and they got a couple easy wins last week, and they have Illinois on the road in the Gavitt games. That's another tough game that it should be a lot of fun to watch, but Marquette, they have a really talented roster. Tyler Kolek got banged up. That's something to monitor for sure. Marquette definitely needs him out there on the floor, but I like the fact that Marquette is in the top 5 because Shaka Smart's done a really good job, and they do look to have a really good team this season. UConn's at number 5. The defending national champions have been looking really good to start the year. They've blown out who they played to start the season, like all of the other teams at the top have, besides Michigan State, which we will get to them later on down the list in the AP poll. They have Indiana coming up in the Empire Classic on Sunday. That is not a game that UConn can overlook, but the Huskies do look better than the Hoosiers as of now, and UConn is probably a top 5 team on paper. Houston's at number 6. They haven't really played anybody. They don't really have any tough opponents this week either, so Kelvin Sampson's team, they just kind of keep on winning. They'll stay in the top 10 of the poll. At this point in the season, you just can't slip up against those easy opponents or you will fall far in the rankings, but right now Houston is a top 10 team on paper, and that's why they're ranked as such. Tennessee's at number 7. They're a team that always looks good early on in the season, and then they start to drop later on as the season goes along when they play some tough opponents. They beat Wisconsin in the non-conference. That was a really good win for Tennessee last week. One of the more high-profile games in Week 1 in college basketball. Like I said, the Volunteers usually look good at this point in the season, but can Rick Barnes finally have his team playing when it matters in March? We'll have to see about that, but for now, Tennessee deserves to be in the top 10. Creighton's at number 8, and they've got Iowa this week coming up in the Gavitt games. They have not really played a tough opponent yet either. A lot of these teams haven't, so Creighton being in the top 10 makes sense for the roster that they have and the way they've looked. Duke's at number 9. They fell 7 spots in the AP poll for losing to the Arizona Wildcats. That's not necessarily a bad loss, but because it was at home and because every other team that moved ahead of them did win against their easy opponents, that's why Duke fell so far. Later on in the year, Duke might not have fallen as far in the poll for a loss like that, but because it's so early in the season and Duke is one loss, you had to fall that far, but the Blue Devils still have the potential to be a really good basketball team this season. Florida Atlantic's at number 10. A lot of people wonder if they are actually this good. They did beat Loyola Chicago this past week. That was not actually a bad win at all. Loyola Chicago does have some decent players, but we'll have to see if the Owls are a legit top 10 team once they start playing tougher opponents in their non-conference, and they have to avoid upsets in the American Conference if they want to stay in the top 25 later on down the line. Gonzaga's at number 11. They are playing easy opponents to start the year. Gonzaga will have tougher opponents in the non-conference coming up, and usually those games are going to determine determine how good people think Gonzaga is, because they're not going to get tested in the West Coast Conference outside of St. Mary's, even though St. Mary's lost this past week to Weber State. So Gonzaga, they're going to stay in the top 15 for now until they finally play a tough opponent, and we'll see where the Bulldogs stand. Miami's at number 12. They beat UCF in the non-conference this past week. That was a decent win. Miami doesn't look as good as last year, but I still think on paper that they deserve to be in the top 15 for now until proven otherwise. Texas A&M's at number 13. And in another underrated game in week 1 in college basketball, they beat Ohio State on the road. That was actually a good win because Ohio State is not one of the better teams in the Big Ten, but still going on the road this early in the season. That's a type game Texas A&M would have lost in the past, but Buzz Williams has elevated the Aggies. He's got some talent on that roster. That's a solid win that might age well on their NCAA tournament resume down the line in the season, and that will help Texas A&M move up 2 spots. Arkansas is at number 14. They've had a very easy schedule so far. They don't have really any tough opponents coming up either. As of now, they're going to have more tough games later on in November and in December, but Arkansas should stay in the top 15 until they lose. Baylor's at number 15. They've had easy opponents to start the year also, like all of these teams have, and they moved up 5 spots because a lot of other teams lost. Same with USC. They moved up 5 spots because other teams lost. Both of these teams, we'll find out how good they are once they have some tougher games coming up. Kentucky's at number 17. They fell 1 spot. Kind of shocking that they did. I guess the AP voters felt that these other teams like Baylor and USC look more impressive than Kentucky, but the Wildcats are 2-0, and they do have a big game coming up against the Kansas Jayhawks. If Kentucky can win that game, you know they're going to be moving up big time in the AP Top 25 poll. If they lose, they'll stay ranked, but they'll drop a few spots for sure. Michigan State's the big faller. I've been waiting to talk about this team after they lost to the James Madison Dukes. How do you lose to James Madison? Tom Izzo never drops a early November game to a team like that at home. Usually they lose to some tough teams like the Kentuckys, like the Dukes in the non-conference. They've got a talented roster, but Tyson Walker's been the only Michigan State Spartan that's played really well at this point in the season. Their other guys have struggled, but Michigan State did bounce back and beat Southern Indiana. If they can beat Duke and Butler this week on their college basketball slate, then the Michigan State Spartans will move right back up, and everybody will forget about that loss. This is a Tom Izzo coach team, so you know that they're still going to play hard. But if they lose to Duke and Butler this week, Michigan State will fall out of the top 25, and a lot of people are going to have questions for the Spartans. Texas is at number 19. They've had an easy schedule to start the year, so not much to comment on with the Longhorns. They fell a spot because other teams moved ahead of them. Same with North Carolina as well. They've had 2 easy wins. North Carolina's going to have tougher opponents in the non-conference coming up, and that's where we're going to find out if the Tar Heels are a legit top 25 team as well. Villanova's at number 21. They've had an easy start to the schedule, but they've got a game with Maryland coming up this week in the Gavitt games. That is going to be an interesting matchup. Maryland did lose to an easy opponent in week 1, so maybe Maryland is not as good as we think, but they could also bounce back and shock the Wildcats. So Villanova, they're in the top 25 for now, but can't lose to Maryland this week. Alabama's at number 22. They beat 2 easy opponents so far. They don't have anybody tough coming up, so Alabama should stay in the top 25. They keep winning. Illinois is at number 23. They had a scare against Oakland. Did not beat them by a lot of points, but I guess the AP voters did not feel that Illinois should be docked for that performance and fall out of the poll. But Illinois has a lot of question marks still with their roster, and they're going to have some tougher games coming up, including Marquette this week. If the Fighting Illini lose to Marquette in the Gavitt games, they could fall out of the top 25. James Madison is at number 24. The mid-major love is in for the AP Top 25 poll because they were able to beat the Michigan State Spartans in the first game of the season. What a win for the Dukes. They did struggle a bit in their next 2 games, but the voters did put them in the top 25 because you had to after beating Michigan State. And Colorado at number 25 to round out the top 25 poll. They were in the other receiving votes last week, but because a couple of teams lost, Colorado sneaked in. They have a talented roster, and if the Buffaloes have success in the Pac-12, Colorado could be a team that we see frequently in the top 25 poll, but it will be interesting to see how Colorado performs as the season goes along. And in the other receiving votes, Memphis barely missed being in the AP Top 25 poll. Then you got Virginia, St. John's, Rick Pitino squad looking good early. There's a good shot that they can crack the top 25 if they keep winning. UCLA, TCU, San Diego State fell out of the AP Top 25 poll. James Madison was able to give the mid-majors some love in the top 25 poll since San Diego State couldn't stay in the top 25 because they lost to BYU, who is the next team in the other receiving votes. BYU is a team that hasn't really been as good the last couple years, but maybe with that win over the Aztecs, that could possibly mean that Mark Pope's squad could be making some appearances in the AP Top 25 poll later in the year if they can keep winning. St. Mary's fell out. Another mid-major school fell out of the poll because they lost to Weber State, a really shocking loss by St. Mary's. There wasn't too many shakeups in the poll last week, but San Diego State losing and St. Mary's were a couple of notable results. Mississippi State, Iowa State, Wisconsin, Auburn, Michigan, Weber State getting a couple of votes because of that win over St. Mary's, Drake, Boise State, and Clemson round out the other receiving votes. All of these teams have a shot to get in the top 25 poll if they can get some big wins in the non-conference, but we'll definitely have to see how it all shakes out as the season goes along. It's just 1 week of college basketball action that's occurred. Definitely not time for some overreactions if your team loses an early game like Michigan State did or San Diego State. These teams still have a lot of time to bounce back. They can get some big wins. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below about the AP Top 25 rankings. I don't really have much to say about where the voters put these teams because we're going to find out how good all these teams are in the next few weeks, especially once we get into conference play. But I don't think the AP voters necessarily did a bad job because a lot of these rankings are just based off the potential of the teams alone. But college basketball should be a lot of fun this season. I can't wait for these big events like the Champions Classic, Gavitt Games, and the Maui Tournament Battle for Atlantic kickoff. Those should be a lot of fun for sure and will definitely impact the AP Top 25 rankings. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I will see you next time.